Should you self-publish your book? That's what we'll find out on today's episode of the Journey to KidLit podcast with Brooke Van Sickle. Welcome to the Journey to KidLit podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Van Sickle, and each week on the show, we'll discuss what it takes to write, publish, and market your kids' book. Let's get started. This episode is brought to you by BiblioKid Publishing, the children's book publisher that donates 50% of their profits back to education. For a look at their books or to learn more, visit BiblioKidPublishing.com. Hey there, and welcome to the Journey to KidLit podcast. I'm so excited you're here. As always, I'm your host, Brooke Van Sickle, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about self-publishing and whether it's right for you. Self-publishing is so easy to do. If you have a computer with internet connection, you can technically launch a book in an afternoon for the whole world to read. That's how easy it is. However, I would never recommend you do that. Publishing a book, whether traditionally or by yourself, requires a lot more work before you put it out there for the world to read. But if it's that easy, why doesn't every writer do it? There's a few reasons behind that question. Even though it's 2020 and self-publishing through Amazon alone has existed for over a decade, there's still a negative stigma around self-publishing. People don't consider you a real writer if you don't publish with a top 5 traditional publisher. They think that the quality is less than what a traditional house can provide, or they think that you weren't good enough to get published traditionally, so why should they read your self-published book? It's really unfortunate that these stigmas still exist, because they're 100% not true. Sure, there are some authors that will click publish on something that shouldn't be published, but there are also people who get published traditionally whose story probably should have been reworked before turning it into a book. Overall, though, writers, no matter where they're published, have spent a lot of time working on a good story. In order to move forward with the self-publishing journey, you have to be willing to rise above those negative stigmas and put your blinders on. But even if you are willing, it still doesn't mean self-publishing is the right path for you and your story. There are 4 kinds of people who should self-publish a book. The first is someone who already has a platform. If you run an online platform at all, you know how much work goes into building a fan base. I did this with my Journey to KidLit community, growing from 0 to over 1,500 email subscribers, 2,500 Twitter followers, and hundreds of thousands of monthly Pinterest views in a year. When you work that hard to build something, it only makes sense to offer insights to your fan base that you know they'll love. Sometimes this can get you a traditionally published book contract, and other times it makes more sense to publish it yourself. Especially if you're going to have to do most of the marketing, you may as well get a better return on your investment. The second is someone who has a deadline. Traditional publishing can take months and sometimes years before your book comes out. And that's after you spend time trying to find someone who likes your book enough to take it on. If you have a story about a time-sensitive topic, that might not work for you. In this case, it's a good idea to consider self-publishing. For publicity reasons, I would still not recommend publishing in less than 3 to 6 months from your deadline, but you can make it happen with shorter deadlines. The third person is someone who's a naturally gifted marketer. When you self-publish a book, it's normally a one-man team, which means it's up to you to write press releases, plan a launch, run ads, and find ways to get added exposure for your book. Some people love to learn about this kind of stuff, while others would rather write a book and never tell anyone about it. Those kinds of people might be better with a traditional publishing contract at a larger house, where they have a team of people who can help you push your book. And finally, the last person is someone willing to put in all the work. Self-publishing is predominantly done by you. Even if you use an illustrator, editor, printer, or anyone else to help you, it's still your job to find those people. You have to be the one to stay on deadline, put forth all the money up front, and produce a story that's worth your reader's time. This isn't something to take lightly. If you do, you run the risk of having a failed book launch, which can only hurt you, both your pride from not feeling successful, and later if you want to use a traditional publisher. Self-publishing is a very rewarding accomplishment when you execute it correctly. It's awesome whenever you get a hold of a copy of your book, something you poured hours of your heart and time into. If you didn't find yourself falling into one of these 4 categories, it doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't self-publish your book, but I would caution you to really think things through before you move forward. Understand your motive behind wanting to publish it yourself. Are you being impatient? Have you considered other alternatives? Has anyone besides you in your inner circle read it? Have you done your research to make sure your book idea is even a viable option? These are all important questions everyone should ask before trying to get published, either traditionally or by themselves. Well, good luck with your publishing journey. It's going to all be worth it once you get to see your story on a child's bookshelf. And speaking of new books, my debut picture book, Pirates Stuck at Sea, sets sail at the end of the month. I'm so excited for everyone to read it. I can't wait. And if you haven't already, you can pre-order yourself a copy from BiblioKidPublishing.com, and I'll be sure to sign it for you. Plus, 50% of the profits will be donated back to help fund education. I'll put the link to order in the show notes. And that about does it for today's episode of the Journey to KidLit podcast. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. To get the show notes and links to everything we talked about, visit the podcast tab at journeytokidlit.com under episode 4. As always, I love hearing from you, so if you have a thought about today's episode or a suggestion for future ones, send me an email or reach out to me via Twitter. And if you liked what you heard, be sure to leave a review, and while you're there, subscribe to be notified of new episodes. Until next time, happy writing!